so many people come on Friday evening. A big thank you to all of you for sparing your Friday evening for a talk like this. I'll very briefly talk about this lecture series and about alternative futures before I introduce Mansoor and ask him to take the floor. This lecture series has been, in a sense, long in the making. In India, there is not so much of work done on thinking about futures. I was thinking, we are all aware of our individual present. Some of us are aware of our individual future. Some people are aware of the collective present, but there are very few people who are aware or who try to think about the collective future. And that's our quest, that's our purpose. That's also our quest with Alternative Futures and with this lecture series. And I think people who think about the collective future are like, I would call them modern day sages. And I dare to say that they are those to make a presentation to you. Because I think deep and fundamental thinking about the collective future is very important. And that's what we have tried to do in this lecture series. Just a few words about alternative futures. As I said, it's a quest to create another future. Of course, it's a very big thing. We are a small organization, small resources, but the vision is big. So let me say what that vision is about. It's about a future that is much more humane and just than the future that we see, than the present that we see today. And when we began, we thought of these 4 principles that I think very nicely define at least the contours, the broad contours of the kind of future we want. And those 4 principles are ecological sustainability, social justice, cultural pluralism, and spirituality. The last one is particularly sort of unusual in development circles or development thinking, but we think it's very important. In fact, I won't say anything about sustainability and about social justice because they are quite well understood. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I'll say a bit about cultural pluralism and about spirituality in terms of the principles as we see them. I think pluralism is important because, like many roads lead to God, I think it's of immense importance to realize that there are very many different ways in which we can bring about change, which we can create in the future. And I, for one, and we as an organization would respect and would consider each of those ways of working to create the future very valid. Now, this is a rather subtle point and an important point because very often it happens that some people consider their own methods as more privileged or their own ideology as more privileged. So that's one. And as far as spirituality is concerned, we think it is basically the unseen bonds among all of us. And among all of us, even among man and nature, even among man and animal. And really speaking, if one has the attitude of spirituality, I think the other principles almost, if one takes spirituality seriously, get subsumed in a sense. So that's all that I want to say for now. I'll just say a couple of words about Mansoor before I ask him to speak. He's an alumnus of IIT Mumbai, Cornell University and MIT Boston. He began his career as a filmmaker and then went on to make feature films that won several national awards. And I think there are some people who miss him as a filmmaker. I read a HT article some time ago which said, where the hell is Mansoor Khan? Why is he not making films? So, in 2003, he moved to Kannur to realize his life's aspiration of starting a self-supporting organic farm. Spread over 22 acres, the farm, it's called Acres Wild. It plays host to those seeking an alternative lifestyle experience. In 2013, he authored The Third Curve, The End of Growth as We Know It. It is the outcome of Mansoor's own journey and extensively researched piece of work that examines the correlation between the compulsions of economic growth and the limits imposed on us by nature. Questioning the efficacy of the modern industrial world, The Third Curve unfolds truths that civilization might perforce have to accept, not merely as a possibility, but perhaps also as a way of life. He has delivered lectures on various aspects of the third curve at institutions like the Indian School of Business, Indian Institute of Management, Foreign Services Institute, CEO Club, Bangalore, etc. What we found, what I personally found, and I'm sure my colleagues found very inspiring about Mansoor was that here is a person who has had the courage to move from a more conventional and a fairly successful career or lifestyle as a filmmaker to organic farming and to doing some serious fundamental thinking about the future. So I'm sure what he has to say is very profound, and I seek your attention. And he'll speak for about an hour, and then we'll have questions and answers and an open house for about half an hour. Mansoor.
Thanks for inviting me and making this happen, and thanks for all of you. It's always encouraging to have a house full. I've been given very little time, so I'm going to just jump into it, okay? Because the whole thought should get complete. Basically, I want to set the table straight. I don't talk about many things that sadly we are hearing a lot and we need to talk about. I don't talk about the environment. Okay, I don't talk about injustice, inequity, climate change. That's not what I talk about. Those are all important, definitely relevant issues, but we've heard all that. I speak something which is not about the moral right or wrong. I speak about the possible. What is possible and what is not. Let's forget whether it's good or not. Even if it's bad, is it possible? So that's what I talk about. Basically the subject, I mean, my book has got a slightly abstract title. I think this will take some time to warm up this screen. The third curve, but the second part of it, the subtitle, the end of growth. Growth is the key word. My subject is about growth. So when we say growth, we know which kind of growth we are talking about. We are talking about economic growth, GDP growth, industrial growth, that kind of growth, money growth. And I'm saying that we have reached the end of growth. It's a slightly radical thing to say, but I'm going to try and convince you about that. That's what I speak about. And growth as we know it. I don't mean the other kind of growth where we become more peaceful, harmonious, loving, artistic. That is qualitative growth. I'm talking about quantitative growth, which is embedded in our economics. Now, 1750, in fact, started this concept of growth. This concept never existed before 1750. There is somebody who's done the GDP of the world over the last 10,000 years. It used to be very modest, and it used to be a little wave like that. I should include that slide, but I don't have it right now. And then 1750 it took off towards the sky. GDP growth of the world, which means products, services, and stuff that we manufacture, make, etc. And it went on from 1750, and we expect it to keep going on forever. Actually, I had to stop this at some point, but we expect it to keep going on forever. Now let me tell you, in this time, 1750, we've actually gone through 3 phases. Okay? If you divide the time from 1750 till now, phase 1, 1750 to 1960, was when we got all these wonderful things, cars, telecom, surplus food, whatever, I can't read it very well, computers, all these things. We got satellites, communication, medicines, air travel, mega cities, which we term as the modern industrial world. And we always think that these are, now man has made it, he's done it. We'll have no diseases, we'll live on the moon, we'll have surplus food. Life is fabulous, which is why this phase, we started feeling the sky was the limit. And I call it paradise times, 1750 to 1960. This kind of, I was born in 58, 69 man landed on the moon. This was the kind of sentiment that even I had, that wow, we have broken everything and we're going to do. But just when we thought everything was hunky-dory and everything was going to be great, we'd be served by robots and God knows what all, we entered phase 2. Phase 2 was 1970 onwards, where suddenly we had species extinction, falling water tables, soil fertility loss, drying rivers, water crisis. If you notice, all these things are connected with life. Biodiversity loss, food prices going crazy, population explosion, climate change, and war. Endless war. It was as if life itself was withering. So from that paradise times, we suddenly got a shock. It started with little things. One whale is disappearing, one panda is in trouble, one polar bear is in trouble, but all those dots added up. Groundwater gone, forest gone, species extinction. And it added up to a big picture, which I called phase 2, life with us, and I call it ecological collapse. Phase 1, wonderful. Phase 2, oh my God, life is in trouble. So we said, okay, we'll allocate all these funds and we'll start these wonderful organizations, WHO, this, that, save the this, save the that. And with our money, we will save all these things. But just when we thought we were going to do that, we entered phase 3, which was post-2008, where the very thing with which we thought we would save those things itself was disappearing. Money. Inflation, failing banks, devalued currency, financial instruments which were dangerous, inequity rising, food prices going crazy, debt crisis, industrial slowdown, financial bubbles, volatile markets. So the very financial side, which we thought was our domain, which we were protecting, which we were shaping, and which we thought is in our control, itself was collapsing. So 3 phases. Money itself was withering. Life was withering in between. Now money is withering. I call this economic collapse. Paradise times, ecological collapse, economic collapse. 3 phases. Now, when you look at it, what is the connection? Very rarely do we find somebody who draws a connection between these things. Is it just separate things that are happening back to us, or is it connected? Is God just deciding that let's just blast these guys with all these things? Or is it something that we are doing, which is the connecting dots between the good things, the life collapse, and the economic collapse? And I'm going to convince you that the connection is growth. Endless, relentless, perpetual, exponential growth. Growth is a religion. It's the biggest religion. Christianity doesn't stand a chance. Islam doesn't stand a chance at all. Hinduism, Buddhism, you name it. You put them all collectively in the bigger religion than that is growth. Growth is a faith. It's a faith that is built into us that no, this is going to go on forever. And this is the supreme thing. Everything else, no matter what else happens, no matter what we need to acquire, get, burn, we will continue growth. This is the fundamental religion of the modern industrial world. So 2 questions about this great religion, which most people subconsciously believe in. And the temple of that is the Lord Street and Wall Street and all these places, but everywhere, in our minds. 2 questions. Is perpetual growth possible? So this is the possibility question. The second one is it desirable? Usually people get stuck in the desirable part, so I'm going to keep that second. Because I'm going to first ask you, is it possible? How many of you think perpetual growth is possible? Perpetual quantitative growth, right? GDP growth, right? Okay. I'll first go there and then I'll show you whether, we'll talk about whether it's desirable or not. But is it possible? Is perpetual growth possible? So we have a mind. When we talk about growth, let me put it in context. First we think of something. Like I think of lifting up this glass. It has to be a concept first. But to do it, it's not enough for me to think about it. My body has to do it. And because it's small, my hand fits around it, I'm able to pick it up. Then I want to grow. So I say, let's lift up the chair. Because that's what we call progress. Small, bigger, bigger. Then I think of this chair. And my body is again able to do it. So mind thinks, this will always be in red. Mind is concept, red. Body is reality, green. Okay, this is the dichotomy that through the whole argument, I'm going to keep this in mind. When you see red, it's always a mind concept thing. Wherever it's green, it's a body reality thing. So the body has to do it, reality has to do it, concepts are not good enough. And then we say heavier, lift up this, lift up that, maybe I can lift up a lot of things here. But soon, I'll say why not lift up this? That's very simple, it's very clear that this I cannot lift up. Or anybody cannot, nobody can lift up. And if you can, I'll give you something heavier. No limits. So minds have no limits. Quantitative limits, okay? Whereas bodies have limits. You'll say, oh, why waste time? This is so obvious. But we need to go through these steps to understand where did we go, where did we lose it? Where did we start getting deluded that limitlessness is possible? Another way to explain it is a coach and a runner. Like a coach is a concept guy, red. Red is concept, mind. Super concept. He says, I'm going to make you run at 1200 kilometers per hour. Break the sound barrier. Now, at the face of it, it sounds impossible. But see the way he presents the argument. It's very important to see how the argument is presented. It's very easy to fall for it. That's the point I'm making. Can you run at 10 kilometers per hour? So I say, yes. 10 kilometers is like slightly faster than walking. He says, well, all you need to do is run 7% faster each week. Not faster, not slower, exactly 7% faster. So I run 7% faster the next week. He says, can you run at this? I say, yes, 10.7. He says, next week, can you run 7% faster of this? I say, yeah, 11.55, of course. He says, next week can you run 7% faster of the week before? 12.25. I say, yes. He says, well, then in just 70 weeks, which is 1.5 years, you will run at the speed of sound. How many of you would like to try this? You'll be super famous. You'll earn so much. I tell you, you won't have to listen to people like me. Okay? And see, this is how he shows it. He says, look, 1, 2, 3, third week, fourth, fifth, sixth. And I say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I'm only going 1 kilometer faster. This is my growth curve. And I have wasted 10 out of 70 weeks. 1/7 of the time is gone. And I've only reached not even 20, it's 19.67. And I have to go there, that's 200, oh sorry, I don't have to go there, I have to go 1200. I have to go there, which is 5 times the height of this, 6 times the height of this. I said, how on earth is it going to happen? He said, relax, he said, you don't have any faith in numbers. Watch. So he shows me. He says, see, at the end of the 10th week, the chart that he showed me, I was 19. He says, just do your calculation, at the end of the 20th week, you'll be 38. At the end of the 30th week, you'll be 76, 149, 294, 579, 1139. Now, if you notice what's happening, what is 38? What is 76? Double, 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 double. So we are in a doubling paradigm. That is the trick of compounding. So what looked flat for the first 10 weeks and harmless, in fact useless, suddenly explodes into a curve which accelerates towards the sky. This curve is the exponential curve. We've all heard the term, but very few of us know what it feels like. Very few of us know what it means in reality. It's a mathematical concept. It is a concept which we have created by creating a simple set of logic rules. But whether it is achievable is a different story. So this is the exponential curve. We expect me to behave like this. But I'm foolish enough because I'm already thinking of the fame and glory and money and women and whatnot. So I say, okay, let's try it. So this is what he has set for me, right? So he sets the pattern. He says 7% faster, 7, 7, 7, 7. So for the first 10 weeks, I'm able to follow. The red curve is his mind curve, which I've already plotted and put in on a chart in his office. And the green curve is my body curve. And I'm able to do it, 7%, 7%. I've drawn it very sharply. Of course, it won't look like that. But what I mean is that my body curve can follow his mind curve. When he says 10.7, I can do it. 11.41, I can do it. 12.45, I can do it. So my body curve is matching his mind curve. After 10 weeks, which is phase 1, remember phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, his desired speed and my actual body speed are matching. So I am lulled into a sense of confidence and I say, hey, this is cool, this guy is great. I just have to do what he's saying and I'll be flying. But what happens as we enter the 11th week? He said run this fast, but I was only able to run this fast. There was a slight difference. 7% he said, and I was running 6.8 maybe, or 6.7. So he pushes me harder. Instead of 10 hours training, he says 12 hours training. And as he pushes me harder, the next week, there's a bigger differential. And you can try that with your bodies. You can try it with anything like that. And the differential between the two, that is point 1. After point 1, the two curves part. The differential between his expected speed and my actual speed keeps actually increasing. So he's saying 7, now I'm actually running at 4.5. He pushes me more. He says 7, I'm running at 2.5 or something like that. The differential is increasing. The more I push my body, I take supplements, I take all kinds of things that you're not supposed to take, steroids. I now work for 16 hours a day. I don't meet my friends. I'm losing it. I'm working really hard and I'm getting fatigued. My body is losing it. And at a particular point, I'll reach a peak. Bodies reach peaks, minds don't. That is the fundamental thing that I'm trying to say. Bodies are physical things which have limits. And this we have to always achieve through a body. This is what he's projecting. I reach a peak. Now what do you think is going to happen after this peak? If I push myself more, 22 hours, I'm sleeping for 2 hours. This is the idea is work more, you'll get paid, don't worry. You work on Saturdays, work on Sundays. Now that's the thing. Can you actually do it? Can you actually get that? So if I push myself more, this is what my body is going to look like. It's going to start deteriorating. I'm actually going to go slower. I'll have muscle pulls, I'll have this, I'll have palpitation, I'll have something else. High blood pressure, I don't know what. Psychologically also I'll get affected. So notice the difference of the two curves. This is the way we plot our mind curve. which is an exponential, and this is what we want our body. We want our body to achieve this, but your body is capable of this. We all follow the bell curve. We all follow the bell curve through our life also. Middle age, you're the best, strongest, fastest. Post middle age, you go down. Bell curve is called the normal distribution curve because it is normal. It is normal in everything. And we'll come to see in how many things it is normal, we'll come to see in a minute. So this is stage 3, descent, and what I look like. I didn't want to look like that, but that's what happens. Now let's forget about coaches and runners. We are not here to waste our time with coaches and runners. We are into the big stuff. Remember I spoke about growth. So the actual concept in reality is money. Money is a concept, which is why it's red. How many of you people eat money? How many of you people eat bread? But we call money bread. This is how deluded people say, no, bread. So this is money. It's a concept, it maps value. It is not value in itself. It's a concept, it's a creation of the mind. It's a way of mapping the value of something. You say this little thing or this paper or this coin or this bit or whatever you want to call it, Bitcoin, maps the value of something which is of actual value to us, which is real. And everything which is real comes from the earth. So this is the bigger body, like the coach and runner. This is the coach's concept, which is the concept of, here the coach is the mind of the financial system. All of us collectively. There's no single bad guy. It's not about a finance minister. It's not about Bill Gates. It's a collective belief that money represents value, but actually it represents this, and this is the body of the earth which represents the value. Everything of value comes from that. Now how do they behave? How does this behave and how does that behave? How does the money behave and how does the earth behave? Let's take a look at how money behaves first. Money behaves the way we want it to behave. So we make the laws for money. First we say money is equal to value, which I contest. But let it be. Let's assume that money is equal to value of something. Each time you see a ring, it is one concept. So each of these ellipses is, or layers is one concept, and it's coming from your mind. Money is equal to value. So I've got 10 lakhs. Now I keep it under my bed. I have a friend called Sanjeev. He's a very enterprising guy. He makes marvelous cakes. He makes such good cakes that they get wiped out within 15 minutes in the morning when he puts it on the shelf. So he knows that he has to make more cakes. But to make more cakes, he needs more capital. So he says, Mansoor, you're a fool, you're keeping your 10 lakhs under your bed. It's remaining 10 lakhs. Give it to me. I said, why? He says, well, if you give it to me, I can use it to buy more eggs, more sugar, more flour, more labor, etc. Make more cakes. And the profit which I get, I'll give you 7% out of it. I say, wow, that's good. So here starts the second concept. The second concept is the concept of interest. And the moment you bring in the second concept, which is called time value of money, you get the idea of growth. The growth vector starts. That growth vector was not there before, if you remember, right? Because there is no growth. The 10 lakhs remains 10 lakhs. But because he's doing this, he's giving a second concept to money called interest. Because he's going to make more stuff, I agree, but we'll see how much of that he can do. We start something called growth. So 7% he's able to give me every year. So 10 lakhs he gave me here, 10 lakhs 70,000, 11 lakhs 40,000, etc. You can do the math. But every year it's going linearly up. My money is growing linearly, straight line. It reaches the right side of the page. The next year, when he gets that 70,000 in his hand, suddenly he realizes that he has to expand his business. So he says, Mansoor, don't take this back. Leave this 70,000 with me. I say, why? I suspect it. I say, why do you want to do that? He says, no, I'm going to return it to you, but if you leave this with me, I can now use that to make more cakes, buy more sugar, more flour, more labor. And I will give you 7% on 10 lakhs plus that 70,000. I'm taking baby steps. You guys already know this. But it's very important sometimes to go through the steps which we take for granted. How did we take these steps? Because it seemed intuitively perfectly okay. Because he could get more sugar, he could get more flour, he could get more labor. So he says, fine, if you do this, then I can give you 7% on 10 lakhs 70,000, and the next year I'll give you 10 lakhs on 10, whatever the number is. But it looks like this. Stunning. With just one concept, I've changed the way money behaves from this to this. That's an accelerating curve. Do you know what this curve means? This means it never reaches the right side of the page. It reaches the vertical. It is asymptotically reaching the vertical. It never even reaches here. It's a mathematical concept. And it accelerates faster and faster and faster and faster. In about 15 times it goes out of our atmosphere. In another 3 times it goes out of our universe. And another single time, I don't know where it goes. You can do the math. That's the beauty of it. This is called accelerating growth, exponential growth. But we have defined money's behavior from our mind. This is an insistence. It may have nothing to do with reality, but this is but it sounded logical. When Sanjeev said it, I said, yeah, this makes sense. Of course you can buy more sugar. Of course you can buy more flour. Of course, he was not a bad guy. He's not a cheat. He's not cheating anyone. He's working hard. He makes good cakes. I like it so much that I say, Sanjeev, just keep my money. So the fourth concept comes automatically. Sanjeev didn't even need to convince me about it. So it became perpetual, exponential, quantitative growth. This is what I call the money curve. And these 4 concepts I call the money onion. This is an onion. You know how an onion is? You take out one layer, there's another one inside. Take out another, there's another one inside. Take out another. But somewhere it ends. Our money onion goes outwards, which means it may not end. But for the time being, it has only 4 layers. And with these 4 layers, we have defined money to grow like this. Now let's see whether that happens. It looks dangerous to me. But why do we like it? And that's what economics tells us. Classical economics. Okay, maybe not some other form of economics. Classical economics says 10 lakhs at 7% will double in 10 years. In 10 decades, you've got 100 crores. QED. That looks like this. I haven't been seeing this curve before. Didn't somebody else convince us about this curve before? Yes? But up till here, you guys already know this stuff, but I'm still taking you through it. This is where the plot changes. What nobody tells us is that so does the use of our resources. If our money curve has to grow like this, which it has since 1850, something happened in 1850, something happened in 1750 before that, I'll come to that. But if we have to make our money curve go like this, then our energy consumption and our resource consumption has to be in sync with this. Otherwise, how can you say money is growing? I can print money. Obviously, it's not about printing money. You can only print as much as you have. Your money can only grow as much of real things that you made. Real products, real services. Okay? So if we are talking clean classical economics, what we mean is that money will grow if you are able to make products to back it up. Which means you need energy and resources to back it up. And these are actual numbers. I hadn't made this up. And you can see that that's the pattern that energy has been following. That for us to make our money grow like this, sorry, this figure is wrong, okay? It's not 1,000 trillion, GDP is 50 trillion. It's about 45 trillion. This I initially had made because I was including other things, like derivatives, hedge funds. Then I said, no, that is imaginary. Let me not bring that in. So this is a mistake. It's not like that in the book. But what I mean is that for money to grow to 50 trillion GDP, the energy curve has to go parallel. This was possible only, this started with 1750 coal. If you look at the GDP of the world, 1750 was static. After we got coal, we got a dense form of energy. And that is what actually allowed you to do this. Dig out iron ore, heat it to 800 degrees, melt it, smelt it, shape it, rails, trucks, trains. The industrial age started. If you ask anybody, what happened in 1750, they say, oh, the industrial age started. Sorry, that's not what happened in 1750. What started in 1750 was we started digging coal and burning it. And that's how the industrial age started. So we are talking about the effect, and we are forgetting the cause. The cause is availability of energy. The pyramids were built, not because the king wanted it to happen, but because he had 30,000 slaves that he could build. The Taj Mahal was built because that labor was there. But that was very petty amount of energy. That was just muscle energy, human energy, animal energy. Very little compared to fossil fuel energy. This is a store of 500 million years of sunlight. 500 million years of sunlight falling on this planet, the savings account. We have burned half in 250 years. Please do the math. Any accountants here? Would you buy shares in this company? Why not? But actually you already bought shares in this company. We are already part of the modern industrial world. We already believe that this is true. So this is the actual plot. Because energy is the thing which is missing in the equation of anybody's mind. I'm not talking about India, I'm talking globally. We have started thinking of money, financial capital, as what promotes growth, what moves things, what moves markets. It's like sitting on a horse cart for 200 years. That we've forgotten that the horse pulls the cart. Because I'm sitting on the cart, I think the cart pushes the horse. It's the other way around. So our inversion of thought between concept and reality got inverted. We started thinking that the more tokens you print, the more resources I can dig out. The more tokens I print, the more resources I can dig out. So we started thinking it's about how many tokens you print. It's not about how many tokens you print. It's about how much resources and energy is available. That was the disconnect. And how does energy behave? I already showed you how money behaves. We made the laws for money. How does energy behave? Now, first of all, I must clarify something which I cannot explain right now. But I must clarify something. All energy that we use to run our systems, fossil fuels, comes from the earth and the other resources. So if you are jumping to conclusions in your mind right now and saying, but there is the sun, isn't it? Yes, there is the sun. But isn't it that same sun which collected for 500 million years? Which is fossil fuels, which we are burning at 1 million times the rate at which it collects. So the sun is inconsequential in the context of fossil fuels. It's like you trying to run your cake business on your salary, whereas of 1 lakh, let's say, but you're taking 100 crores from your father to run it. So what you're taking is so many times more than what your income is. So everything that comes from the earth, which is fossil fuel and other resources, and that's finite, right? But something else that people don't know about the earth, everybody will say, Mansoor, why are you boring us? We know the earth is finite. Sometimes you forget. So I'm just reminding you. But beyond that, what we are never told is that all resources behave in a bell curve. That means when you dig out a resource, let's say an oil well, the oil comes out slowly from one well, and then it peaks. If that well had 100,000, with time, quantity, the quantity with time increases, and when you finished half the oil in that well, or it could be coal, or it could be aluminum, it could be copper, iron ore, whatever. When you finished half, you reach the peak. That means you cannot get it any faster. It only goes slow. This is a geological reality, which is never stressed in any of our schools, any of our studies. Nowhere does anybody mention that we think of the earth as a petrol tank. You know, a water tank. Just imagine you have a water tank, you're having a bath, the tank is full. When it reaches half, after half it doesn't slow down. It goes at the same speed. It's linear. Water tanks behave like this, linear. Same speed from the beginning to the end. But the earth doesn't behave that. So our thinking is water tank thinking. Our thinking is petrol tank thinking. We assume that the earth is a tank. The earth is not a tank. There's no oil sloshing inside the earth like that. It's in porous rock. It's initially under pressure. When the pressure is there, it comes out fast. When the pressure drops at midway point, it goes slow. You cannot beat this point, the peak, the middle point, because after the middle point, it slows down. This is crucial, because this changes your complete perspective. First half going up, second half going down. Now this was discovered, this follows the laws of geology. Laws of geology we don't make. Laws of money we make. Laws of geology are made by God. Whichever God you believe in. But they're certainly not made by us. This was discovered by this gentleman. Okay, he was not an environmentalist. He was not a tree hugger. He was not even an Naxalite. He was an oil guy. His business was, he used to work for Shell Oil. So he's a hardcore, mainstream, scientific, technical, wanting the world to grow kind of guy. Okay? But that was his job. But he was a very sincere guy. His name was King Hubbard. He used to work for Shell Oil. And he noticed this pattern. Because that was what his job was. Every oil well in America, not all were not under him, but for Shell. You notice that in this area, when we drill this well, it would go, wow, it got 100,000 barrels. But at 50,000 it starts slowing down. So he took another well. It would reach a peak. This is called the peak. Okay? Then you look at another well. It followed the same pattern. He looked at bigger wells, medium wells, giant wells, super giant wells. They all behave the same. They would go up, and then half is over, it would go down. Now when you add up all these, imagine there's a place, let's say Austin, Texas. Within Austin, Texas, you took all the wells, and they all behave in a bell curve. If you add up these bell curves, then the output of Austin is also a bell curve. That's a mathematical truth. When you add up different bell curves, it gives you another bell curve. That means you cannot beat the bell curve. You cannot make Austin have oil coming out like this, or Austin having oil coming out like this. it will follow a bell curve. Now, from Austin, you can go to the state of Texas, it will be the same. You go from the state of Texas to the whole of USA, it will be the same. That means USA was going to reach its peak at some point, and he predicted, in 1954 he predicted, that in 1970, US is going to reach the peak of production. That is, post that peak, US cannot grow. How can you grow? How can your car run faster if your accelerator, you press it but it's not giving more oil? Very similar. Industries and economies grow when you have energy to run it. It can only go faster than. That's the reason why they went into the Middle East, and that's geopolitical history. I won't go into that. Okay, but he was called a fool in 1954. But when 1970 came, suddenly from being a very respected geologist, he was suddenly, oh my God, he's gone nuts. For 16 years he had to endure that. And in 1970, everybody admitted, yes, he was right, yes, he was right. Actually, he got a call on the day when he presented his lecture in 1954. He got a call from the top authorities of the country saying, don't give your lecture, because they already knew. They already knew. They said, do not. He was livid. He was angry. He slammed the phone and he went and gave the lecture. And he had to wait 16 years to redeem himself. But whatever happened for US, he also predicted will happen for the world. So similarly, see, you have to discover oil first. So the discovery curve also goes like this. Like, I'm going to look for oil. So I'll find more, then I'll find more, then I'll find more, then I'll find more. And then suddenly I find that I'm not finding that much more, I'm not finding that much more, I'm finding less. This is called the discovery curve. And you can only start producing after the discovery curve, because you first have to discover it and then you produce it. And there's a gap of 40 years between discovery and production. This is the science of it. So you noticed that global discoveries had already peaked in 1960. So he said, well, if global discoveries had peaked in 1960, 60 years later, global production will peak. Because this was the data this pattern he noticed from small individual areas also. He said this is going to be true for the earth. He was wrong by 5 years. That's because the whole world used less oil here. That is when OPEC was formed. So there was a geopolitical event which actually shifted the curve. But he was really, really accurately right. If the OPEC country, which is a cartel, if they hadn't blackmailed the world here and the whole world used less oil, can you see this dip here? If this dip had not happened, this curve would have gone up here, and actually 2000, boom. What amazing empirical science. Has it been taught in any school? Has it been brought to and noticed to any administrator, any politician, any economist? Even the physics guy don't know this. Some abstract geologist knows it, passes the exam, and he says, okay, that's done, let's go. This has huge implications if we only understand the whole thing in context. So that is the difference between economics, and this is a new discipline which I want to, it's a term, if you look in Wikipedia, there's a term called energetics, but it's never used. Economics versus energetics. You see, economics is the discipline of money, but money is a concept which maps value, it's not value, it doesn't actually run your world. With that money, you buy oil, you buy coal, it will map the value of the energy in the coal or oil or whatever, or even resources. So money is a concept, and we make this out of our mind, and the laws for that we make out of our mind, the way we want it, or the way it appears to be going through for that point of time. And that gives us this discipline called economics, which gives us the idea that money has time value. You're a lazy person who keeps, Mansur was a lazy person who used to keep his 10 lakhs under his bed, but Sanjeev was a very enterprising person who used to use that 10 lakhs to make it grow. And that's what we feel we can do. It's only a matter of enterprise and hard work and vision and innovation and out-of-the-box thinking and all this stuff that you hear in corporate worlds these days. But sadly, this is not true a bit. Because what actually runs your world is energy. That is true about your body, about ecosystems, about a snail, a snake, a river, your whole wind pattern system, your rainfall system, it all runs on energy. And it does energy accounting automatically. If you eat 1,000 calories of food every day, and I say, please do me 1,100 calories of work. You say, why on earth should I do that? I say, really, why? If you do it for 6 months, and your deficit is 100 calories per day, multiplied by, how much is 6 months? 30 into 6, 180. 180 into 100, I'll give you 10 times that calories after 6 months. So your mind will negotiate it. Your mind says, super, yeah, very good, I'll sign. But when you talk to your body won't do it. Your body cannot run in deficit. This is the dichotomy between the mind and the body. So you can create the concept of debt, for instance. in economics. You cannot create the concept of debt in energy. If you give less energy to an ecosystem, it will shrink. If you give less heat to a rain cycle system, there will be less rain. If you give less heat to a grassland, the grass will grow less. There is no fudging. There is no concept of debt. It is impossible. That is energetics. That is energy. Energy laws are written, thermodynamic laws, geological laws, physics laws are written in the universe. With our mind, we thought we were fudging it. But we'll see how we fared with that very shortly. Energy is reality. Okay, and that comes from the body of the earth. In this specific case, since we are talking about our economic system and our industrial system. Okay, it is determined with how much you get. And this field is called energetics. I'm writing a whole book on this after this, hopefully when I have the time. Because energetics is the discipline which is completely ignored from all our education system. I've spoken at IIT Madras, and they said, you're right. I said, where are you guys? You know thermodynamics. So where are you applying the laws of thermodynamics? Are you really doing it? Are you really doing that accounting accurately? No, they're not. So this is how it works. Now let's compare economics versus energetics. Because of the laws that we made for money from 1900 or even before that, we have managed to make our money in the system grow exponentially. Exactly as per those 4 laws. Remember? Money is value, money has time value, this should compound, this should happen forever. Ever will come to, but so far we managed to do it. How much of it is real, we'll get to know in a minute. But we managed to. Doesn't this curve look very similar to what the coach was saying? To what we wanted to do? To the exponential curve? Well, we managed to do that in some ways. But look at this side. In the meantime, oil has been following, and by the way, this is true for a lot of other resources. But the reason why I'm talking about oil is a key resource. If you have an arch of resources, you have many stones in an arch. You put all these stones. Each stone represents one, let's say, commodity or a resource. Iron, copper, this, slate, marble, water. But the top stone, which is called the keystone, which holds the arch together, which if you pull out, the whole arch falls, is energy. And in this case, it is fossil fuels. And out of those 3 fossil fuels, the 3 sisters, coal, oil, natural gas, oil is the most peculiar. When you go back and you look, if you have the time, you'll be stunned at what oil means in our system. It's not only the energy, it's liquid, it's dense, but it gives you 6,000 byproducts that you don't get from anything else between oil and you cannot replace it with anything else. So look at the difference. We want to do this, and this is what we are given to do it with. Put them together. This is what my son wants, and this is my salary. So while my salary was going up, my son would say, Dad, I need more. I'd say, okay, here son, take it. Dad, I need more. Take it. More. But when I reach here, my salary is not increasing the same way. And he's saying, give me this much. And my salary, my boss has given is one only here. But because I love my son, this differential I fill up with a credit card. So I get a credit card, take debt, buy him this Ferrari or whatever he wants. My father did this for me, let me tell you. But he didn't borrow, but he did. I should know this. So this is what happens. That this is what we want, and this is what the earth will give. The earth is our mother, and she behaves like this in everything. All resources follow a bell. Phase 1, the 2 curves go together. Phase 2, your expectation curve goes there, your reality curve goes there. Phase 3, they actually move in opposite directions. So let's just go through it very quickly. Phase 1, while it was going through, if I printed more money, then I could give it to somebody and say, hey, come on, you guys go and dig that coal. But the coal was there, and the earth was giving me the coal faster, so he could go and dig it out. Then I would say, no, I need more capital. American banks just print capital. You go there, we say, need $1,000. They just print it, because the assumption was that there is the energy and resources to back it up. So in the first phase, money growth and real production were in sync. That means your money was true. If Tata's shares went up by 10%, Tata had made 10% more trucks. If Tata's shares went up by 20%, Tata had made 20% more trucks. In this phase of our industrial age, the money's value was increasing in a true fashion. It was not false growth. It was real growth. But, just to remind you what these 2 curves are. But when we entered phase 2, How did we do this? We did it with these 4 concepts, remember? And we honestly believe that it's because of these 4 concepts that everything is going fine. We were never even factoring that the earth behaves in a bell curve. We were saying money is equal to value, interest compounding down, very good, give it to him, he does it, super, money is growing like this. So this money onion was flourishing and doing very well and everything was fine. We didn't need to expand the money onion. We were happy with these 4 laws in the money onion. But when we entered phase 2, just like the coach and the runner, the coach is saying, run here. But the runner runs only here. This is what your bank says your money should be worth this. But you actually only produce this. That's the difference between dividend and share price. Dividend is what you've actually made. Share price is a marvelous creation of the mind. So that's where we came back to the money onion in phase 2 where he said, hey, let's fill this differential. Let's fill it with the stock market. Now, I'm not saying the stock market started in 1960, by the way. This is somewhere in the late 60s, okay, when this parting, or 70s. I'm not saying that, but it got institutionalized at a grand scale. Stocks were never a part of everyday life. Every auto wala, every rickshaw wala, every farmer is buying stocks. No. Buying stocks became, it got, what shall I say, institutionalized into the whole system around about this time. Now what did it mean? It meant that while Tata's dividends is only this much, 15%, which nobody used to even, they should laugh. He said, dividend kaun deta hai? Share price dekho na. Because share price is 100%, it can be 200%, it can be God knows how much. But that's a betting model. You started a casino. It's a gambling model. Casino is, by the way, a speculative symbolic growth. We can all bet on a glass of milk, all of us. When the price goes from 10 rupees to a lakh, has the nutrition increased? We can still feed one baby. Why is it not 10 lakhs? So we had to. Remember, my talk is not about morality. My talk is about possibility and how we fool ourselves. This is how we fool ourselves, that we have created value by betting on it. You started an institutionalized gambling there. In Goa, you need to go in the middle of the river to do that, because it's in the Bible they say it's haram. I'm sorry, it's in Quran. But even in the Bible, they'll say it's a sin. Gambling is a sin. Moses came down and broke those temples and whatnot. Remember that news which had come out? So Moses was very upset. So gambling is obviously a social sin because it doesn't create value. When we gamble, let's say we're playing cards, 4 of us. 3 people lose, I win. I've taken their money. Where is the productivity? I'm very rich, 3 people are poor. It's a zero-sum game. So that is the difference between creating this. This is where we started getting virtual. But we said, wow, we created another concept. Our growth went from so many billion to so many billion. But very soon we needed to make that many billion become that many more billion. Right? So there was, banks had to keep lending money for this to happen. Remember, if you don't lend money, your money doesn't grow. Remember, I used to keep my money under my bed. It didn't grow. The banks lend more and more to meet this curve. If they lend only 10%, which banks were supposed to do, and hold 90%, which is what banks were supposed to do, so that if one fine day you want to go and take your money out, the money should be there. That 10% which they lend is to create the interest so that they can give you an interest on your capital. But now the damn interest is going higher and higher, they need to lend more and more. So instead of lending 10%, the bank said, no, we'll lend 20% and hold 80%. Then they lend 30% and held 70%. Then they lend 40%. Nowadays, banks lend more than they've got. So what does that mean? It means you get fantastic growth, you're lending it, but one more vector is starting here, which I will in a minute tell you what this vector is. You're getting growth on one side, but something else is creeping up under us. If some of you have guessed what it is, very good. There's something else which is creeping up on this side by this dangerous game that we're doing. You've lent out more money than you have. How do you know that those people are going to actually do something useful with it, or will be able to do it and give it back so that I can give it back to the depositor? The differential once more increased and we reached the ceiling. As much money as there was in the system which was related to gold, because if you have so much gold, US can print so much currency. India has so much gold, India can print. It was called the gold standard. You had to have something backing that money. Money cannot be just floating in the air. But now you reach the ceiling. You just imagine you've grown a plant and the plant reaches the ceiling. You say, oh my God, what do I do here? So you remove the ceiling. and the rain comes in and you drown. So that's what we did. We removed the ceiling. We said, sorry, no gold standard. Nixon said that in 71. He said, no gold standard, guys. Don't worry, you can print as much money as you want. So money became fiat. It became up to the political will how much you wanted to print it. Earlier it used to say, if you take this dollar back, you'll get so much gold back. Now it says, you go take this dollar back, they'll give you another piece of IOU back. You know, one IOU for the other, not a real piece of gold. So we removed the gold standard, and now you can see what this vector was. It was risk. So while you're perpetuating growth by more and more concepts, which has nothing to do with reality, obviously the risk will go up. Obviously there's something not true, which is under the surface. Obviously why? Because I'm producing this much and you're telling me I've produced this much. Isn't that false? Does this money represent any real stuff? No. So risk was going up on the other side. And this is what we did. The differential kept getting larger and larger. We came up with leveraging, a concept where Sanjeev, remember the guy with the cake shop? He says, I've got only 50 crores to put down, but I need 1,000 crores, guys. He comes to a bank. His bank says, you're only putting 50 crores and you want 1,000. Because poor Sanjeev has to change that growth curve also. He's become an international cake maker now. Okay, he doesn't even make as many cakes, but his share price is very high. Now he needs 1,000 crores. And he has only 50 crores collateral to put down. Bank says, okay, you know what? I remember in physics, my physics teacher had taught me, if you want to pick up 10 kg, you put 1 kg, put a long rod, and you can lift it. See how we borrow from physics, from the real world. And we call that concept leveraging. So he said, Sanjeev, don't worry, you can leverage your $50, 50 crores, and we will give you 1,000 crores. Okay? Because we kind of trust that you have good ideas and it'll happen. So we introduced a concept called leveraging. But leveraging means that what if Sanjeev is not able to return it? The bank says, wait a minute, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'll tell you what. Sanjeev says, if I'm not able to return it, I will give you a premium. If I default, I'll take an option. So you give me 1,000 crores, I have 50. I take an option on it. If I'm not able to do it after 2 years, I'll pay you this premium and please forgive me. Now can anyone tell me what? So we came up with the idea of options. See how we are adding concepts just to match this curve in a mind way, in a symbolic way. Can you tell me how much Sanjeev should pay if he's not able to pay the 1,000 crores? You remember he took 50, he put 50 and he's taken 1,000. If he defaults, what should he pay as the premium? Quick, simple answer. Somewhere between 50 and 1,000. This is the answer. So simple. I mean, just a bunch of alphabets. Oh, sorry, I'm getting late. Yeah. So that's options. And then, so we came up, that was the derivatives. The formula I showed you is derivatives. The guys who came up with it, they got the Nobel Prize, and they used the same formula in their company, lost $4.6 billion. Everybody forgot about it, nobody took their Nobel Prize back. Everybody's happy, and Nobel Prize still exists. I have to rush because Rakesh has reminded me. Then we came to another thing where commercial banks and investment banks couldn't lend to each other because they were playing around with all the depositors' money. Commercial banks is us, investment banks are the guys who don't care who you are, and they take all the money. Glass-Steagall Act was put in place so that they could not play around with your money, and their hands were tied because they needed capital to play around. So in 2000 or 1990 somewhere, this act was repealed, which said, okay guys, you can play around with everybody's money. And with this act being repealed, we use this concept, and this concept, leveraging options and derivatives to come up with complex financial instruments. Hedge funds, slice and dice, CDOs, SIVs. All this stuff was creation, paper growth, tranches, cocoa bonds, mind-blowing mathematical stuff which required physicists who launched satellites to actually come up with those equations. And this is true, I'm not making it up. This is the growth graph. 1, 2, 3. Each time you want to grow from here to here, you come up with a new concept. You want to grow from here to here, you come up with a new concept. You want to go from here to here, you come up with a new concept. But can you see the gap is increasing? That's exponential growth. Unbelievable growth, crazy risk. Boom. March 2008, we were waiting for it. I was waiting for it for years. From 2000, we were saying it's going to happen. when we reach a particular point, there'll be an explosion which happened in March 2008, which is called the global financial economic collapse. What happened? We were floating up here in our imaginary values. This was real productivity. We hit peak oil. The stuff that actually runs your world, we hit the peak. And the price of oil shot, boom, 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 boom. From $35 a barrel to 146. Your global economies collapsed. $50 trillion got wiped out. As if they never existed. If you spoke to a finance guy, ah, maybe 50 chala gaya, what are they? But I asked him, you told me this was real, na? Now you're talking as if it was gas. But of course it's gas. 1750 started this concept of growth because of energy. Because of a store of energy. Energy drives everything. That's why it's worshipped in most cultures. Ra, Surya, Sun. Because that was energy. Ordinary indigenous people knew it intuitively. But we are not intuitive. We are too smart. A little too smart for our own good. We said it's not about the sun, yeah, it's about this. And then we even forgot it was about that. We said it's about the financial capital, which it is not. So post 2005, we are actually in shrinkage. What you're experiencing, what the world is experiencing, which they call recession, they'll call it a this thing, they'll call it a that thing, I don't know what they call it. It is basically industrial energy descent, shrinkage. And when energy and resource descent happens, your real productivity goes down. When your real productivity goes down, your economic systems collapse. And all that gas which you thought was real starts coming out the backside. That's what we are actually facing. If you read the Economic Times, you won't make out that's what's happening. Two questions again. Is perpetual growth possible? I proved to you it's not. Is perpetual growth desirable? Very quickly. Here's a patient in ICU. These are his life signs. Okay? So I have gone away from the possibility argument, guys. I've come to the morality argument. Okay? Possibility, I have proved to you it's not possible. If you want to think otherwise, do give me your feedback. But that's what I'm saying. Now, this is the morality argument. Is it desirable? Can perpetual growth ever be desirable? Even something that we should want? Imagine a patient in ICU where each one of these are his life signs. This is heartbeat. Heartbeat is going exponentially up. Does your heartbeat go exponentially up? Even if you see Aishwarya Rai, it won't. Or Hrithik Roshan, whatever the case might be. Okay? Blood sugar going exponentially up. Body temperature going exponentially up. Cholesterol, whatever. What do you think is happening to this patient? Heartbeat, body temperature, cholesterol. He's dying. The patient is dying. But this is not the curves of a patient. This is the curves of the Mother Earth. Each one of these are the life signs of our planet. For instance, species extinction, exponential. Loss of tropical rainforest, exponential. Fisheries exploited, exponential. Water usage, these are not supposed to be exponential. And I love this word exploited. It's a very good word. You know, in boardrooms you hear, let's exploit China's markets. Let's exploit the middle class. Let's exploit that segment. You know, it's such a good word. Would you ever go home and say, darling, let's exploit the kids tonight? Honey, we haven't exploited Auntie Jessie for a while. You know? See how we've been conditioned. Our language itself has changed. Exploited is a marvelous word. Everything is a resource. Whatever we set our eyes on is a resource. Even human beings are resources. We call it human resource. But we make it HR, so that you get fooled into believing that. CO2, ozone, everything going exponential. Number of cars. But there is one. By the way, I haven't even given you all the ones which are going exponential. I don't want to depress you so much. The cause. There's one more thing going exponential here, which is the cause, which is driving these other things to go exponential. Can you guess what that is? The GDP of the world. If you want the GDP of the world to go like this, you have to make everything else go like that. There is no way. You have to use more water. You have to use more. You have to use more air. You have to use more material. You have to use more energy. You have to pollute more. You have to burn more. There is no way. It's imaginary growth which we tried that. You remember? CDOs, SMEs, slice and dice, which doesn't give you pollution. But you saw what it gave you. That was imaginary. It was symbolic. Any real growth is going to give you. You have to take from the system around you. And that is the disease. When it happens in our body, we call it cancer. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. This was said by Edward Paul Abbey. Nobody in the history of this world has heard about it. I mean, most people. What do we teach? We teach Einstein, we talk about Newton. It's immaterial to me. E is equal to mc square has no meaning. How does it matter? It's not real. It really doesn't matter. The God party. I think we should leave that to God. What about this? We are behaving like cancer cells. When it happens in our body, we call it cancer. We run to Hinduja hospital. But when we do it in real life, we call it progress. Growth is cancer. Cancer is growth. By its very definition. By its very definition, by its very behavior, it has the same effect. The ecological collapse, all those things which you saw happening over here, down, is global cancer. Water tables falling, this happening, that happening, that happening. Conclusion, is perpetual growth possible? It is impossible. Mathematically, exponentially, you cannot chase. You can chase it artificially. You can chase it symbolically. You can pretend that that is value. Sorry. One fine day when you're forced to eat a 10 rupee note instead of bread, you'll realize it's not. And is perpetual growth desirable? Perpetual growth is global cancer. When people start talking about all the things that are happening, you should say cancer. When people start saying the rivers are trying to say cancer. When people start saying the soil fertility has gone cancer. That is global cancer. The earth as a living organism, it's a living organism. What you're witnessing is global cancer. Don't call it environmentalism. It's too shallow. Call it global cancer. Then you will understand why we are causing it. Because we are chasing exponential growth. But sadly, whether we want to chase it or not, the truth is that real growth is over. We are actually in descent, energy descent. End of growth is our new reality. But we may not be realizing it because for 250 years, we got conditioned into thinking it's our birthright. And it's all about our mind and our innovation and our creativity. So the reality is it's over. We have to deal with this reality. Because reality doesn't negotiate. You can think that you're 25 or 16, but you're not. That is if you're not. So, you cannot fool reality. You don't negotiate with reality. All these climate change meets and this and that and energy meets, you're negotiating with who? I can negotiate with you, but how do I negotiate with reality? This is the truth. Deal with reality or reality will deal with you. Thank you.
Okay, guys. So, the guy is leaving. Excuse me. There's a free book. You can pick it up if you wish. Yeah. And if you're coming back, then you're welcome. But don't take a second one.
Yeah, please pick up the copy of the book from outside immediately. But we have the lecture, another part, 10
Yeah,
minutes
so
continuing, then
this
we'll
one-
have.
I normally don't talk about what to do now because I feel that it takes some time for us to fully roll the thing in our minds and think of it and convince ourselves that the argument is not a false argument and really look at it from all points of view and get used to the idea. But we don't have that much time. So I'm going to move to the next part. There's some folks have gone out. Should I wait or?
No, you continue.
I'll continue. Okay. So basically,
Let's do this for 10 minutes.
yeah,
and then we'll-
yeah, okay, very quickly. So basically, it's called transition. Because we are at the top of the curve. I was not able to show that graph. We are at the top of the resource curve right now. We are at the highest point of using the maximum energy that we can get. Because the earth allows you this. After that, the earth allows you this. So we are at the top. Just imagine that this is the maximum expenditure. You were earning 10 lakhs a month. So you are spending this much. And now your salary has dropped to not 10 lakhs, let's say 1 lakh. Okay, I don't know that much. So let's say from 1 lakh your salary has now dropped to 90,000. Correct? You have to go in sync with the salary you're getting. You cannot go and get a credit card. So that is called transition. Transition is coming from a high state to a low state, which is inevitable. And where does that low state come down to? What is the actual energy budget of this planet? It is the solar budget. The amount of sunlight that we get every day from the sun is the solar budget. That's what I call the third curve. The third curve is the solar budget. See, all our bodies have third curves. Each body has a certain highest point and lowest point. A snake will have it lower, an elephant will have it bigger, a younger person, but we all operate between 2 points. So since we are operating at this high point because we got this loot of energy, which was not our income, it was a savings account, how do we transit? So there's a whole group because the West has gone through this already. There was a guy called Rob Hopkins from this guy, permaculture designer Rob Hopkins, had carried out a student with his students a study called the energy descent plan because we are in energy descent actually. whether anybody can see it or knows about it. And this movement called the transition movement has gone to 35 countries, even more now, because they are already feeling it. India is not feeling it. India is on this side. We are thinking it's our turn now. But the Western countries have already reached that point. They've hit their head at the end of the tunnel. They're bleeding and coming back, which is why they're running to India and China. Okay. So what is transition? Transition is a structured and conscious way of moving safely from our present high energy consumption state based on fossil fuels towards a low energy consumption state of our solar energy budget as represented by this is my addition, of course. Rob Hopkins doesn't know about the third curve, but what he meant was this. So basically, at the back of it, this is the core principle. If we don't recognize this, we have not recognized anything. So we can make false plans. We can say, oh, we'll go to solar, we'll go to windmills, we'll just, we can generate electricity by peeing in a glass and putting two dissimilar electrodes and generate electricity. These are the kind of solutions and answers people are coming up with. That doesn't work. So, what does transition mean? It means that we have to become aware of those principles first. Let me first come to those principles. First, you have to understand that infinite growth within a finite system is impossible. You have to internalize this and be true to that. If you don't, then again we are in a delusion. Energy decline is inevitable, we need to plan for it. So these are the core principles. Based on this, we can make true plans. Modern industrial world has lost the resilience, I'll explain this word resilience in a while, to deal with energy shocks. Resilience is the ability of a system, what you would call immunity in a body, to bounce out of shock. Okay? Resilience comes due to in particular systems, and that I will explain. So the modern industrial society has lost this. We have gone towards the quantitative and we become unresilient. The smallest thing shocks our economies. Environmental collapse, climate change, and peak oil are interrelated. We have to act now together. We have to act together now, taking them all into account. So all these things these are the core principles of transition. So we have to understand this. It's not just a quantitative approach. Let's put CFL bulbs. Let's plant a few more trees. These are quantitative approaches. There's a huge difference between a quantitative approach and a qualitative approach. Quantitative is only saying, I'll do less of this. Qualitative is changing your lifestyle, your outlook to what you do, the way your society operates, on what principles it works. That's a qualitative change. So transition intrinsically demands a qualitative change, whereas the world has been so far only involved in reduce CO2 so much, put some CFL bulbs. That is a quantitative. Many environmentalists are also stuck in that approach. Many environmentalists are also deluded thinking that the quantitative approach is good enough. So, come back here. But when we do it, we get discouraged. We feel like, how can I make a change? We expect the government to do it. We say, alright, go and talk to the government. The government has to do it. What is this nonsense? But if we wait for government, it will be too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little. But if we act as communities, it might be just enough, just in time. So it means realization at an individual level. What are the principles of transition? Where is the fundamental problem? If you are not convinced that growth is over, who would you vote for? There are two candidates, Mr. M and Mr. M. Mr. Big M says, I'm going to get you double-digit growth. And I say, guys, growth is over. Who are you going to vote for? So if you can't blame it on the government is only going to do what they think you believe. I don't blame the government. It's very easy for us to. There are other things where we can blame the government, but not in this. This is a paradigm shift. If this paradigm shift doesn't happen in our heads, and then one to our community, from the community to your local panchayat or the whatever, like they have their local in US or in England, their local council guys or like county guys or whatever they are called. They have to be included. So first there has to be a room full of people like us who understand what's happening. Rather than just say, let's have Earth's Day and switch off lights for 1 hour. What does it mean? You can switch off lights forever, but if your concept of compounding and money growth is there, it's going to offset this. So the concept of compounding money growth, which is built into our system, has to go. You can see Japan is at 0 interest rate level. It's already going. Reality is already manifesting itself. US growth interest rate was 0.25%. And everybody was mocking them because you won't be able to do it, you won't be able to do it. So they said, chalo, 0.75 badha de. Just to show the world that Janet Yellen said, Otherwise, they'll think that we are worthless. And they did it, and the economy tanked even more because it can't deal with compounding. So this is what transition means. We need to. This is where I am. I am here to realize it myself, to communicate and build a consensus of understanding, which will then percolate upwards. It cannot come downwards. These are the principles which you need to understand. They'll be different in different areas. You know, in the industrial age, in the industrial world, our answers are single button answers. अच्छा energy problem है, windmills लगा दो, solar panels सब जगह लगा दो. That's not the answer. You have to localize. I just put solar panels for my one little cottage at the farm. And I realized how expensive it is. Many of you have hopes of solar running the world. Please set up one for your house and you realize why it doesn't work. Because it is net energy deficit. And it gives you only electricity. Electricity doesn't run your modern industrial world. Liquid fuels does. So we have to do local things. Solar is not useless. But solar you cannot have a centralized grid. Put 20,000 solar panels in the middle of the Sahara Desert and everything will be fine. No. It has to come to a local level and you have to reduce your requirements. You may not be able to run your washing machine on it. You certainly cannot run your heavy industry on it. So the realization of these principles is very important. And each place will have a different answer. If you're near the coast, you will deal with it in a particular way. Because you have food from the sea. You have a particular kind of thing. So there is no single answer. But we are used to single answer. भाई क्या करना चाहिए? अच्छा वो UPS लगा. So there is no such single answer for transition. Transition is going to evolve depending on your culture, your community, your local resources. Because one of the main things is that so I've gone through this. We have to shift our quantitative approach to the qualitative approach. We have to understand the difference between efficiency and resilience. See, the industrial world chases efficiency. In order to chase efficiency, you actually lose resilience. Because efficiency means you try to find a single path, the single shortest way, the single cheapest way to do something. But when you do that, your system becomes very vulnerable because if that single path is blocked, the system is gone. Our bodies are resilient because they have multiple paths. Small towns are resilient because they have multiple paths. If you can't get tomatoes from it, you can get it from there. If you can't, this guy won't give it to you, you can get it from there. There's a local doctor, These are resilient systems. Human societies were resilient. Today we have taken away the resilience by chasing efficiency and growth. And then you have only one guy giving you that. You have Walmart. You've got to go with Walmart. You've got this, you've got to go with that. So we remove resilience, which is the ability of the system to bounce back out of shock. If there's a shock, like some local calamity has happened, then your system will bounce back the more resilient it is. And those communities which we are destroying actively and saying that, oh, they are backward, we need to give them all an iPad, we need to give them all internet, we need to, they are actually removing resilience. And we are under the guise of efficiency. Let's make them more efficient. Efficiency is great for an industrial production system. But it has very little purpose in ecology, in societies, in human communities. It's not all about efficiency. The mother doesn't try to feed her child as efficiently as possible. She lets the child drink as slowly and however he wants or she wants. So this idea of efficiency is a very industrial idea. This is a natural idea. This is what works. This is what works against everything. Moving back to local. Now this all we've heard. Local food and materials. But these are all aspects of the transition method. Because obviously, when you move to local, you're going to need less energy to bring it to you. Obviously, when you go local, you help the local community, the local barber, the local carpenter, the local this. You build your relationship with that person. Otherwise, you say, sorry, you're a carpenter? No, I can get it from there. Bye. So your community itself has become weaker. I have no bond with that guy anymore. And this is what we are doing in our communities. We are losing social capital. They're losing the love and the compassion and the interconnectivity of the society under the garb of convenience, efficiency, growth, etc. Alternative agriculture. We have been brought up with the idea of modern industrial agriculture, which is what? Which is you plow the earth, that is you violate the earth first. The earth is not meant to be dug. The moment you dig it, you violate it forever. Half the organisms in it die straight away. They were supposed to be there, it was a web. But you killed 30% of them. Now the one who's left, he was supposed to eat this. He says, hey, this guy is not available. What should I eat here? So he eats your root. Then you call it potato blight. You call it this. You actually brought it on yourself. Then you start a whole chemical factory to deal with that. And then you pump your soil with chemicals. Then you get cancer. Then you start Hinduja hospital. And then you say GDP has gone up.
Close and then
Yeah.
let's with the discussion.
Right.
But those were the basic things. Yes. sir.
Two questions. Firstly, if we've come to this, it's hard to believe because this is the first time we're hearing something like this. But if we've plateaued on the bell curve, how come commodity prices have fallen to an all-time low? You know, oil, which was $140 a barrel, has come down to that price, so 1/4. So if there was such huge growth happening, at least we should have expected the prices to sustain.
Yeah.
That's the first part.
Yeah.
And secondly, if you look at this growth and why people are looking to India and China, the reality about our countries are you've got like 600, 700 million people who are still existing the way life was 20, 30 years back. They don't want this high energy efficient, they don't want cars. They are staying in a suburban area, they still have cows, they're still doing the regular. So is China. So the two countries which have like 2.3 billion, 2.5 billion people actually aren't driving this consumption to the extent that is being highlighted.
You're right. So we are making.
Can you also give your name, please?
Yeah,
Can you
Yogesh.
please, those who ask questions, please give your name because it's being recorded, and please be brief
Yeah.
with your questions.
Yogesh, and those are the two questions.
So okay, coming to the first one. See, our system is in the our global economic system is in the ICU right now. So there is demand destruction happening at one level. Oil prices are down partly because of the demand destruction. On the other side, there are 2-3 things happening. It's a complex phenomenon. When we come on the downside of the resource curve, some things happen which we cannot immediately see. So there's a geopolitical war happening between the energy producing countries. And even if you're an energy producer, you need to keep pumping it at a certain level to keep it going. Though you have come into, and these require the understanding of energy principles. See, when you start oil wells, your EROEI, your energy return on energy invested is high. That means you put in 1 barrel and you get 100 barrels out. Okay? So I don't need to drill that much oil to be in surplus profit. But as you go past, your EROEI drops to 75:1, 50:1. We are now 6:1. So as your EROEI drops, you need to keep pumping more to get the same profit margin. So in a certain way, Saudi and all are bleeding. Saudi it's not just that it's a geopolitical war, but it's also economic reality that they have to keep pumping. They can't slow down. If they slow down, they're selling shares in Aramco. They've never sold Aramco shares. So they're not in a nice rosy place as they used to be before and just controlling things. This is the post-peak reality of many things. So everything is not on the face of it. So there are certain, gold has gone up because it's a better store of value than other things. So, or at least relatively compared to money. Money your government is going to take away. Look at Cyprus, 60% gone, boom. One fine day the bank says, sorry, anybody with $100,000 plus, it's not there, 60% is not there. Or even if you've given it and it's in the bank, they've lent it out to somebody. You go to a bank, all of us should go to a bank, one bank if you want, and say, we want all our money back. You won't get it, it's not there. So there are many complex things, but coming back to your thing, the global economy is in shambles. Shipping is 30% down. Airlines is in trouble. And airlines would be already bust if they were not being supported by subsidies in fuel by the government, And governments can't afford to let the airlines go because it's a critical part of your infrastructure. If your airline starts falling, then your concept of globalization goes out of the window, So much of this is debt, basically. Yeah.
There's one question there at the end.
Yeah.
At the end. The gentleman.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You said the reality is growth is over. I stress the word reality here because that's what you said. But the reality is that in the last 10 years, on average, most countries have grown between 1 to 8%. So that is not the reality that growth is over. I would accept your statement as true if most countries were stuck at 0 to -%. So it is very, very far from reality. Most of the things you said have no relationship to reality. They're based on a myopic and dark imagination. The truth is technological advance is unpredictable and practically infinite, and so therefore is growth. It's just based on taking the experience of a few years as a universal experience applicable to the whole history of mankind, past, present, and future. It's outrageous, sorry.
Okay. So one thing I'd like to say is that when you're saying that the growth is 1.8%, but it used to
Between
be,
1 to 8%.
but it used to be 5%, so it is going down. I'm not saying growth is over, it is
Five
in
is
descent. So what is that? It has not gone, and I'm talking about the macro growth, okay? It has gone down. Well, from 5 to 1.8 is going down.
If it had gone to 0 or minus 10, you could say
Right.
growth is over.
So I don't want to change anybody's personal opinion. I've given an argument, and you may feel that it's outrageous. I would let you sleep over it for a while and check it out over the next few years, because whatever I used to say in 2005, before I wrote the book and before the economic collapse happened, people would even more strongly oppose it. So I said, hold on guys, hold on. The pattern evolving takes time. The unfolding of the pattern takes a little time. When somebody smokes and he tells his doctor, what are you saying? Cigarette smoking causes cancer. I've been smoking for the last 8 years, I haven't got cancer. Then he meets him 2 years later and says, see, I'm alive after 2 years. So the nature of some of these unfoldings is not that drastic as you may think I'm trying to make it sound. But what is drastic in a growth paradigm is that the moment the stagnation happens, your growth is already gone. We don't need to reach the bottom of the curve. The moment the stagnation and the descent starts, your growth models are already in trouble. And that is what you can see. When you read your Economic Times and all these papers tomorrow, look through the lens of energy. You will get a different answer. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mansoor, let's take 3 or 4 questions
Yes.
down together.
Okay.
So you ask your questions and then we'll answer together.
Mr. Mansoor,
Yes.
the way you refer to energy,
Yes, sir.
I think basic law of energy is energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. So how you convert energy from one form to another?
Your name, please?
Dr. Sarabjit Dudeja.
Okay.
The
Thank
second
you.
one is you gave curves about 10 options. Can you justify why these people failed, whether it's a Malaya or Sahara group and all? What's the
Well, I'm not a business analyst,
Let's
but I will answer your first question.
Let's take 3 or 4 questions because if the time is limited,
Yeah.
let's take
If
3 or 4
anybody has the
questions.
same question, don't ask.
Okay, please, that gentleman there.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you give the mic to him first?
After you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is KP Fabian.
Yes.
I do agree with you 99.999%.
Thank you.
When you said about gambling doesn't create anything, that took me to Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, but I won't go into it
Okay.
another time.
Okay.
But A goes A down.
Yes.
E is equal to mc square. So from small amount of matter, we can get so much of energy. Now, if there were a technological breakthrough,
Right.
including cheaper way of getting solar energy, incidentally that is nuclear energy.
Right.
Now, if it were there, then the argument which you made,
Yes.
that
Would be untrue.
the energy growth will
Yes,
come down.
yeah.
I had it down.
Yes,
How do you-
I've been approached with this question. Let's start off. It comes spontaneously. Yeah. Sorry, I have to come back to your. So this is in my mind. See, easy to mc square. But you don't kick an atom and get the energy out of it. So what you need to do is create a very complex. Technology does not create energy. Energy creates technology. This is inverted in our minds. Technology never creates energy. Technology facilitates the extraction of existing energy. It harnesses it. Technology doesn't. So to make a nuclear plant requires tremendous amount of embedded energy to actually make E is equal to mc square come true. That embedded energy, that amount of energy can only come from fossil fuels. And we never do the energetic balance sheet of a nuclear plant. We subsidize it by this devious means of money. That's the wonderful thing about money. I can appear something to be floating because I'm subsidizing it by invisible taxpayers' money. But energetically, it is deficit. So nuclear has always proved itself. So it has many problems apart from I'm not even going into the hazards of nuclear. I'm saying let there be nuclear bombs, let there be radiation, let there be anything. Energetically, it's a failure. Because to make E0 MC square come true, or to do fusion on the earth, which happens naturally on the sun, requires a tremendous amount of energy base and a constant energy base, and nobody does the balance sheet. But the balance sheet becomes inevitable, becomes evident after 40 years, and you say, my God, Japan has decided to shut all its nuclear plants. They can't. You cannot run it when oil costs so much. When it was $10 a barrel, you could run nuclear plants. Because you're fundamentally running these systems on fossil fuels. Your roads, your trucks, your trains, it's web. It's not only the nuclear plant. How did you dig that lead? How did you dig the uranium? How did you transport it? On which roads? How were those roads made? The roads were not made by nuclear energy. The roads were not made by solar energy. They can never be made on solar energy. All these give you electricity. None of these alternatives gives you the stuff which runs heavy machinery. And none of it gives you the 6,000 items that our modern industrial world is made of. Look around you, you're embedded in it. Try pulling one out. I haven't even tried pulling one of them out. I pulled one of them out, plastics, boom, gone. You don't get plastic from nuclear plants. So that is a very quantitative argument. If I have so many calories and I get so many calories, well, if there's no food tomorrow, I'll say, guys, I'm sorry, there's no food. But if I give you a liter of petrol, is it okay? Your body is not designed to run on petrol. So it is not the quantum of energy it matters. Does it sync with your system which is already designed? And to undo that system is called invested capital. So you cannot just switch to electricity. It is impossible. We've been expanding our electrical systems because of nuclear plants. But that is not addressing a fundamental world which you need to run. Yes, sir. So, can you repeat your first question was energy? Now, this is a very commonly misunderstood thing. When people say energy can neither be created nor destroyed. But energy is used only when it is in a dense form. This is called low entropy form. Okay? So energy in your petrol is very different from energy which is there in the room. The ambient energy. The ambient energy is still the same energy. But this is unusable because it is high entropy energy. I cannot use this energy in the room, but I can use the energy which is low entropy energy. So energy, when you burn fuel, some of it goes to push your car forward. Some of it generates heat which just comes out of the back, and it is used by mosquitoes. So that ambient energy will be very good for mosquitoes. It will be very good for mosses, ferns, fungus, etc., flies. But it's of no use to us. So that is a very common misunderstanding of the meaning energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It cannot be destroyed, but it cannot run your world. It diffuses into the whole world.
Thank you. Very inspiring, and
Your name, please.
I'm Hafiz. Mansoor, everything that you said is music to my ears, and I have 100% sort of belief in it, because on the quantitative side is something that we've been focusing on. Just one element you've not touched upon, which is largely to do with this belief that innovation can also grow exponentially, and innovation will take care of a lot of technology and other deficits that are there. And this is what is driving the world around currently.
Do you agree with it, or do you?
No, I don't. But you've not touched upon it. That is one of the elements which was, I find, missing. While you focused on the money part.
A cancer cell is very innovative. It thinks of newer and newer ways to just now a new study has come that says cancer cells make other healthy cells do their work for them.
Please do add to your...
So the thing is, being innovative is not, innovation is just a word. What is the innovation for? So if a cancer cell is immensely innovative in taking resources from its neighboring cells to perpetuate its growth. And if you are a cancer cell, which we are, you say, wow, that's great. What do I care about a healthy liver cell? What do I care for an Adivasi? What do I care for a bird that lives in the forest? I am only concerned about my human domain. The cancer cell is only concerned with its tumor. And once that tumor eats up the liver, which it was fundamentally living on, it gets into your bloodstream and looks for emerging markets. Now you understand what India and China are. These are the last two organs to be eaten on this planet Earth.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vandana, and thank you for sharing very interesting concept. I have a very simple question.
Right.
I liked your slides on transition especially, And my question is that when we have 600 to 700 million odd people who we as urban city dwellers see as resilient, when we look at it from their point of view, what they are trying, what they aspire to is an urban life, a better life. So I'm just wondering how what you have said fits in with their aspirations. I don't think they see themselves as lucky to be living with the resources that they are living and to be living closer to the earth and in natural air and all of that.
That is a tragedy of how we have conditioned them. I can't deal with that tragedy. But reality is not concerned with what is tragic. Reality moves on in its own way. You see, we have deluded them with this idea that this is forward, this is progress, this is a better life. Now that's our fault, now we have to deal with it. So when you go and talk in a village, you're right, but I have met a lot of village people who say, intrinsically we already like this. They have been lured by, let's say, mobile phones and certain things, but there are other aspects of their life that they don't want to lose. They are not that silly. There's a lot of stuff. I work with the Narmada Bachao Andolan, I go there, I've had a chance to meet indigenous people, Adivasis, and understand their mindset. We are very quickly, look at our mass television network, telling them that you guys are useless. If you're not doing this, if you're not eating a pizza, if you're not doing that, your lives are meaningless. So we have, but again I come back. What is the reality? Is that the moon is going down, the tide is going out. You cannot argue with the moon. The tide will go out whether you like the water to come in or go out. So we have to understand that rather than put the argument the other way around. What do we tell them? Well, this is what we should tell them. We should tell them, sorry, we were wrong all this time. All this stuff that we thought was progress and good and development is actually A, short-lived, and B, very destructive. That's all we can do. They might not agree with us. And they may continue to want what we want and stuff, but will reality allow it to happen? That is my question. Yes.
Thank you.
At the end of the...
Sir, myself Sriram.
Yes, Sri.
Very happy to know the facts, what are you shared.
Yes.
You told that the solution is like in a community level, in a community level only, and there is no neither a government or a personal level. There is no way to better is community level. But let me tell you one thing, sir. There is in a community also. Here also we observe different opinions are arising on this thing. So see, we have to really escape from this last stage of this, whatever you told, this cancer or this two organ, whatever it is. What is the real solution that factually
I just like to be slightly correct your word solution.
Yeah.
The word solution is wrong. Problems have solutions. The finiteness of your life is not a problem. It is a predicament. So it cannot have a solution. The finiteness of the earth and the laws of thermodynamics are similarly predefined. You cannot change it. So don't use the word solution. What solution is? This is a problem solution thing that we come into. We treat everything as a problem, so we think automatically it has a solution. Everything is not a problem. So we need to accept reality. And I'm not saying that I can turn a key and everybody in the room will start agreeing. And you're right, we had so many opinions. The gentleman completely disagreed with me and he thought I was,
but what the way to
Please don't ask, let's not, we can discuss later.
Just to answer your question, I didn't answer it, that's why he's saying that. The answer is that reality is going to force us to recognize what is happening. I'm only highlighting what's happening. So don't immediately jump to how will it happen, why will it happen, and if it doesn't happen, what do we do? I'm not interested. Let us have the right perspective. If we should only try to see what is around, understand the perspective, internalize it, and then share. And that's where communities come. So we will build a different set of rules for our community. Our expectations will be, we won't just say, vote for Kejriwal. Everything will be alright. We won't come up with these short-term solutions. We'll say, no, we need to do this. We'll come up with completely different ways of running your local communities, electing your local governance, and maybe the centralized government system itself will fall apart. Please, I'm not one of those guys.
We'll take just two more questions. One, my father wants to ask a
question.
So please, one more, that's all.
I am Aril Kapoor.
Yes.
Supposing there were ultimate growth in the coming 100 to 500 years, do you think there will be ultimate destruction? If so, shouldn't our mantra be slow down? Be contented. What our sages have been telling for centuries.
Well, I'm saying that slowdown, sir, is happening on its own. It's for us to recognize that it's happening. The tide is going out, we're in denial. We are calling it other things. So I completely agree with you. We should recognize it and accept it. And our lives will be beautiful. All the things we want to correct, in fact, will happen. The pollution levels will go down. Your ground fertility loss will go down. Your species will bounce back. Your rivers will stop drying. Latur will become wet again. Growth is causing all that. So when we are trying to solve Latur separately, and we are trying to solve the forest separately, and we are trying to solve climate change separately, that we are not seeing the interconnectivity of it. All these separate dots connect to growth. And growth is because of energy. Energy, cheap energy, growth, crisis. This is one diagram that should be put up in all schools. So they see the interconnectivity. We only talk about them in separate boxes. So I agree with you.
Mr. Mansoor, thank you so much for this very thoughtful talk. Essentially, then
Your
we have.
name, please?
I'm sorry. I'm Major Naik. I have just retired recently, and essentially we have to reduce consumption and at community level. The issue is which community first, need versus greed, and conflict for resources. Right from the soldier, right from the ancient days, all conflict for resources. So what thought comes to your mind? That if we don't take care of ourselves as communities, and which Mr. Kapoor just said, some kind of spiritual angle which can prevail all over the world, everyone behaves, which is not possible. We were going more into conflict for resources, and possibly we destroy each other, and possibly the consumers are less, and possibly we regain the balance. That was thought I thought, I don't know how far it is true. It happens.
So first of all, let me give you my mobile phone. Then I'll be. But it's not just about that. I can become a non-consumer, but it's not about the consumption. The idea which is embedded is that money has to grow. So we need to feed the consumption curve. You're being forced to become a consumer because Apple wants to sell the next model. And I'm not saying Apple is a bad guy because that is in the system. That if I'm the CEO of Apple, I have to make my money grow. I have to make my shares grow. I have to. So because of that, I'm imposing and luring you into consumerism. So it is not that intrinsically, Indians are not consumerist by nature. Indians are frugal. Indians are sharing. Indians are community minded. So it is not that we are greedy to start with. Greed is something which happens when you are told your money has to grow. So I said, "Acha, kya kare iska? Isko invest karo." Now my greed has started because you told me that money has to grow. You started the concept that money has time value, interest, compounding, la la la. I was a palmar. I used to make palmar. I used to collect money and I was putting it under my mattress and I was happy. I was not greedy. So the idea that we are intrinsically greedy, I disagree. We become greedy and then we justify that greed. We call it progress. We call it development. We call it innovation. We call it forward movement. We call it all sorts of things. Yes, now it's breeding the greed. Now the greed is breeding. But I was not intrinsically that. Nobody was. So we have to question the idea of time value of money, interest, the systems of economics. That is the questioning which I am actually doing. I'm saying question your fundamental paradigm of time value of money.
I think we close the questions here, and I think it's been a wonderful lecture. I made a promise at the beginning. We want to present to you some deep and fundamental thinking. I'm sure Mansoor has set you all thinking quite hard. That's what we wanted. Before we close this, bear with us for 2-3 minutes. I'll request Mr. Katpalia to come to the stage to just offer a small token of thanks to Mansoor.
Is this presentation available
The one done now. We'll be putting it up on the...
I've got it on my website, but I haven't put the sound. I've been lazy. I should put the sound with my presentation. You can make it a package so that you can...
Yeah, we'll be also putting up the recorded thing on the YouTube. Yeah, and just one or two small announcements. You can pick up the copy of this book when you go out. There are copies available. Mansoor was very kind to give copies for people to pick up. And also, those of you who want to join Futures Forum, we'll be starting a Google discussion group. Those of you who are fine with that, please mention, or we'll just use your email addresses and send you a request because we want to start. start a Google group for that.
Yeah.